June 24th, 1945. A Japanese girl stood in line for execution, not by American bullets, but by her own officers. Her crime: she had survived. Amiko Nakamura was 19 years old, though starvation had carved her face into something ancient and hollow. She knelt in the red Okinawan mud, her school uniform stiff with the dried blood of men she could not save. The Kempeitai officer stood behind her, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. She could hear American voices in the distance, shouting commands she did not understand. She had perhaps 3 minutes left to live. 2 hours later, that same girl sat wrapped in an olive drab army blanket, eating bacon and eggs. She was crying not from fear, but from a confusion so profound it felt like drowning. How does the enemy become your savior? And how does your protector become your executioner? This is the story of the breakfast that changed everything. The island of Okinawa was dead, but it refused to stop bleeding. The official battle had ended 1 day earlier on June 23rd after 82 days of what the Americans called the Typhoon of Steel. The nickname was accurate. More shells had fallen on this small island than on all of Nazi Germany during the entire war. The southern landscape was a moonscape of craters, shattered coral, and the sickly sweet smell of the unburied dead. At a temporary civilian collection point near Makabe, Corporal Thomas Bennett stood guard in the brutal afternoon heat. He was 20 years old, born and raised on a corn farm outside Dayton, Ohio. He had landed on Okinawa on April 1st, which the troops called Love Day, though there had been nothing lovely about it. He had seen things in the past 12 weeks that his mind could not properly file away. Marines using flamethrowers to clear caves, Japanese soldiers clutching grenades running straight into machine gun fire, with their eyes already dead. Local women mothers hurling their children from the high cliffs at Itamen before leaping themselves, choosing death over the dishonor of American capture. Now those same Americans were handing out rations and trying to process the survivors. The cognitive dissonance made Tommy's head hurt. "Move them through, Riley." Sergeant Miller barked, his voice raw from months of dust and combat fatigue. "We got another 100 coming up from Hill 89. Tommy nodded, though his name was Bennett, not Riley. Miller had been calling everyone Riley since Shuri Ridge. Too many men died. Easier to use one name than learn new ones when they kept getting killed. Tommy had stopped correcting him weeks ago. In front of Tommy, huddled behind barbed wire in a group that seemed to shrink with every passing second, were 24 Japanese women and girls. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense, though some wore the tattered remnants of mobilized student uniforms. They were survivors from the cave systems, civilian refugees mixed with Himiyuri students, young women from the Okinawa Normal School, who had been forced into the ghastly role of field surgeons and orderlies in pitch-black subterranean hospitals filled with gangrene and screaming. Among them was Amiko. She looked 14. She was 19. Her face was a mask of dried mud and something darker. Her white school uniform, once the pride of the Himiyuri Student Corps, was stained brown and black with blood. She had been captured 4 hours ago, found hiding in a burial tomb clutching a rock. She had failed her nation. She had failed to die. Now she waited for the inevitable dishonor her teachers had warned her about. The propaganda posters had been very clear. The Americans were beasts, red-faced demons who would defile Japanese women before killing them. She and her friends held hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white. They were not trembling from fear of death. They were trembling from fear of what might come before it. The processing line was crude, a few folding tables under a flapping canvas tarp. Medical orderlies, exhausted and numb, were tasked with delousing and basic triage. The air smelled of lime disinfectant and human waste. "This is a mess," Tommy muttered to the man beside him. Sergeant Kenneth Yamamoto was a Nisei, a second-generation Japanese-American from Salinas, California. He was 28 years old and part of the military intelligence service. His job was to translate, which was perhaps the most thankless assignment on the island. The GIs looked at him with barely concealed suspicion, his face identical to the enemy they had spent 3 months killing. The Japanese prisoners, when he spoke to them in their own language, spat at him when the guards were not looking. Their eyes burned with a hatred reserved specifically for traitors. "They are terrified," Riley Ken said quietly, looking at Amiko's group. "They think we are going to eat them, eat them." Tommy scoffed, shifting his rifle. "We are not cannibals. We are just trying to stop them from getting typhus. Their propaganda tells them otherwise," Ken said. His voice was neutral, but his eyes were sad. He had learned long ago that explaining the cultural chasm between Japan and America was like explaining color to the blind. How could an Ohio farm boy raised on stories of liberation and apple pie ever comprehend a code of honor that demanded this level of sacrifice and anticipated this level of brutality? Emiko watched Ken Yamamoto. He looked Japanese, but his uniform was American. He was the Inu, the dog, the collaborator. He spoke to them in gentle Japanese, asking for their names, their villages, their ages. Emiko refused to speak. To give her name was to acknowledge she was a prisoner, and to be a prisoner was a shame worse than death itself. She stared at the ground, her body trembling, anticipating the moment when rough hands would grab her. 6 months earlier, Emiko had been a different person. She had been a student, a daughter, a girl with a future. Her teacher, Yoshida Michiko, had stood at the front of the classroom and distributed white nursing uniforms with the solemnity of a priestess bestowing sacred vestments. "You serve the emperor now," Yoshida-sensei had said, her voice steady and proud. "Death before dishonor. The chrysanthemum chooses when to fall." Emiko's father, Lieutenant Nakamura of the 32nd Army, had written her a final letter before being deployed to the Shuri line. She kept it folded in her uniform pocket until the paper began to disintegrate from sweat and rain. "Remember the chrysanthemum, Emiko-chan," it read in his careful script. "It chooses when to fall. Never let the enemy decide for you." Her mother had pressed a small jade charm into her hand during the civilian evacuation. "Your spirit is Japan," her mother had whispered. "Do not let them take it." Emiko had wanted to be a teacher like Yoshida-sensei. She had wanted to open a school for Okinawan children to teach them poetry and calligraphy and the beauty of their own language. That dream felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone who had died in the caves even though her body kept walking. The heat was oppressive. A fly landed on Tommy's cheek. He did not bother to wave it away. He was too tired. He looked at the girls and saw his sister Sarah's friends back home in Ohio, just smaller, just broken. He had been hardened by the fighting on Kakuzu Ridge and Shuri Castle, but this was different. This was not combat. This was something his training had not prepared him for. "Listen up," Sergeant Miller shouted, walking over with a clipboard. "New directive just came down from division headquarters. We have got a potential typhus outbreak in the 96th sector. Command wants full delousing and medical inspection on all female prisoners. Effective immediately." Tommy looked at the women, then at the medical tent, then at the half-dozen male GIs standing guard. "Sarge," Tommy said, his voice low. "You mean all of them, full processing, Riley? No exceptions." Ken Yamamoto read the translated directive. He understood the military necessity. Lice, typhus, and dysentery were enemies just as deadly as the 32nd Army had been. But he also understood the women huddled on the ground. He knew what full medical inspection would mean to them. It was a cultural violation so profound, it was tantamount to the very dishonor they had been taught to die avoiding. Emiko saw Ken's face tighten as he read the paper. She saw the other American soldiers look over at her group, their expressions changing from boredom to something resembling grim duty. She grabbed her friend Hannah's hand, her fingernails digging into the younger girl's skin. The propaganda was true. It was happening. They had been told the Americans were monsters, but what if the true horror was not the expected violence, but simply surviving long enough to face the unimaginable? Ken took a deep breath. He had to translate the order. He had to walk over to those terrified girls who were already weeping silently and tell them what was about to happen. He stepped forward, his boots squishing in the Okinawan mud. "My name is Sergeant Yamamoto," he began in formal Japanese. "We must begin medical processing. You will be required to remove your clothing for inspection. This is to prevent typhus. It is medicine, not," he paused, searching for words that would not terrify them further. "Not what you fear." The air, already thick with heat and the smell of death, solidified. The women's quiet sobbing stopped, replaced by a vacuum of absolute terrified silence. Emiko, who had been staring at the ground, slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, clouded with starvation and trauma, were now lit by a new sharp fire. She looked past Ken at Sergeant Miller, who was impatiently wiping sweat from his neck, and at Tommy Bennett, who was nervously shifting his weight. "No," Emiko said. Her voice was a dry rasp, but it cut through the air like a blade. Ken flinched. "Please," he said, his formal Japanese slipping into something more desperate. "It is only for hygiene. It is necessary." "No," Emiko repeated louder now. She pushed herself to her knees, her small body trembling, with a defiant energy that seemed impossible given her physical state. We will not. The other women, seeing her courage, found fragments of their own. They huddled closer together, a small defiant island of rags and mud and unbroken will. We will die first, a younger girl whispered. Her name was Hannah. She was 17 years old. She clutched a torn piece of her nursing uniform like a talisman. We will die. Sergeant Miller stalked over, his face flushing red under his helmet. What the hell is the holdup, Yamamoto? Get them in the damn tent. Ken turned, his face pale. They refuse, Sergeant. Refuse. Miller laughed, a short, ugly bark that held no humor. This is not a negotiation. Tell them it is an order. An order from the 10th Army, General Stilwell's command. We are not asking. Ken turned back to the women. He repeated the words, translating order with the only term that fit in Japanese. Meirei, a military command, an absolute directive. The use of that word was a catastrophic mistake. It confirmed every fear they had been taught. This was not medicine. This was the prelude to dishonor. This was the ritual their teachers and the Imperial soldiers had promised would happen. Emiko stood up. She swayed so frail the wind might knock her over, but her gaze was level. She looked directly at Ken Yamamoto. You are not Japanese, she said, the words heavy with venom. You are a dog. Tell your masters that the women of Okinawa know how to die. We will not be shamed. Beside her, young Hana leaned close and whispered in Emiko's ear, her voice barely audible. If they touch us, bite your tongue, bleed fast. Do not let them defile your body while you are still alive. Emiko nodded. She had prepared her soul for death. She had practiced the poem she would recite, a 17-syllable haiku about cherry blossoms and the eternal spirit of Japan. She had not, however, prepared for what came next. God damn it, Yamamoto, what did she say? Miller yelled, his hand moving toward the flap of his holster. She said, Ken's voice was shaking now. She said they would rather die, sir. Die over a flea bath? Miller was incredulous. The cultural chasm was too vast. To him, this was basic sanitation, a simple matter of preventing disease. To them, it was a violation worse than death itself, a spiritual defilement that would follow them through reincarnation. He looked at the sky, exasperated. Riley, get in there. You Evans, we will make them. We will strip them ourselves if we have to. It is for their own good. Tommy Bennett's blood ran cold. Sarge, he said, his voice cracking slightly. We cannot. They are just girls. Look at them. They are kids. They are POWs, Corporal Miller snapped. And they are carrying disease. You want to explain to the CO why half the 77th Division is dying of typhus because you got squeamish. Now move. Tommy looked at the women. Emiko's eyes were closed now, her lips moving in what appeared to be a silent prayer, or perhaps a final poem. She was preparing for death. He saw his sister Sarah's face superimposed over hers. Sarah was 16 back home in Dayton, probably at a sock hop, or studying for exams, or doing any of the 1,000 normal things that girls in America got to do. He could not move. He looked at Ken, a desperate plea in his eyes. Ken Yamamoto felt the weight of both worlds crashing down on him. He was a traitor to the women, a failure to his superiors. He stepped between Miller and the huddled prisoners. Sergeant, please, Ken begged, his military neutrality shattering. If we touch them, they will kill themselves. I am not exaggerating. They will find a way. We have to wait. We need female personnel. We need a nurse. Anything. Miller stared at Ken, then at the rigid waiting women, then at his own men who were rooted in place, their rifles pointed at the ground. Nobody wanted this. This was not why they had enlisted. This was not the war they had trained for. Damn it, Miller said, slamming his fist into his palm. Fine. Fine. We wait. But they do not move. Nobody goes near them. Riley, you are on watch. Yamamoto, you are not leaving my sight. The tension remained a suffocating blanket over the entire collection point. The sun beat down. An hour passed. The women remained standing, a silent, fragile statue of defiance. Tommy stood guard, his stomach churning with something that felt like shame. This was not war. This was something broken and ugly, and he did not know how to fix it. Later, as the brutal Okinawan sun began to dip, staining the sky, a sickly orange that reminded Tommy of infection, the GIs prepared their evening rations. The standoff was still in effect. The women had not moved. They had not been given food or water, and they had not asked for it. Their silence was its own kind of weapon. Tommy's squad mate, a tall Texan named Marcus Johnson, was crouched over a small heating stove, melting a block of government-issue processed cheese in his mess tin. He had received a care package from home the previous week, a rare and precious thing. Inside had been a bag of flat-fried corn chips, triangular and golden, and utterly out of place in the mud of Okinawa. "What is that slop?" Johnson Tommy asked, opening his own can of cold sea rations without enthusiasm. "This," Riley Marcus drawled, stirring the bubbling yellow substance with his K-bar knife, "is the food of the gods. My mama sent me the chips. You just melt the cheese, pour it on. We call them nachos back home." The concoction was bizarre, an alien sight in the aftermath of the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. Marcus scooped a chip full of the molten cheese and popped it in his mouth, closing his eyes in something approaching religious ecstasy. Once Tommy looked at the nachos. Then he looked over at the silent women. He could see Emiko's profile, sharp as a bird's, her face tilted toward the darkening sky. They were starving. He had seen refugees in the processing camps fight over a single grain of rice. These girls had probably not eaten real food in days, maybe weeks. "Give me the tin," Tommy said suddenly. "Hey, this is from home," Marcus protested. "Give it to me, Johnson." Tommy took the hot mess tin, the metal warming his palms. He grabbed a handful of the strange triangular chips. He walked slowly toward the women, his boots crunching on the coral gravel. Ken Yamamoto tensed, ready to shout a warning or throw himself between them if things went wrong. Tommy stopped 10 feet away from the women. He knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He placed the tin and the chips on the muddy ground. Then he backed away, holding his hands up, palms visible. His rifle was slung backward over his shoulder, clearly out of reach. Emiko stared at the offering. It was unthinkable. The enemy, who just an hour ago had threatened to violate their honor, was now offering food. She looked at the tin. The smell was sharp, salty, utterly foreign. The color was a bright chemical yellow, bubbling over triangles of baked corn. It looked like no food she had ever known. It was not rice. It was not fish. It was not pickled daikon or miso soup or any of the subtle, careful flavors of Japanese cuisine. This was loud, aggressive, American. She looked at her friends, their faces masks of confusion and hunger. What was this food? Was it poison? A test. The American soldier had threatened them with violation, and now he offered them this bizarre golden substance. Emiko's stomach cramped violently, a betrayal by her own body. She had not eaten anything substantial in 6 days. In the caves, they had subsisted on seaweed scraped from rocks and rainwater collected in helmets. Her body was eating itself, and now 10 feet away was food. Strange food, enemy food, but food. She stared at the tin of nachos. It was the most alien thing she had ever seen. The American GI stood 20 feet away now, watching her. His face was unreadable. Young, tired. He looked nothing like the red-faced demons from the propaganda posters. He looked like a boy who had not slept in weeks. In 3 hours, Emiko would learn a truth so shocking it would shatter everything she had been taught about honor and enemies. But first, she had to survive this moment. And survival, she was beginning to understand, required a choice she had never been taught how to make. The choice to accept mercy from the people she had been raised to hate. Her hand, caked in mud and blood, moved. It was slow trembling, an act of betrayal against everything she had been taught. The other women watched, holding their breath. This was a moment of profound dishonor. She was acknowledging the enemy. She was accepting their food. She was choosing to survive. Her fingers, thin as bird claws, closed around one of the corn chips. She lifted it not to her mouth yet, but to her nose. She inhaled. Salt, corn, processed oil. Nothing natural, nothing Japanese. The smell of machines and mass production, and a nation so wealthy it could waste resources on making food bright yellow. Then she put it in her mouth. The crunch was shockingly loud in the silence, the sound of a world breaking. The flavor exploded on her tongue, a wave of artificial salt and processed cheese that was both disgusting and overwhelmingly shamefully delicious. It was the taste of a different world, a world of excess and machines and impossible abundance. A world that made cheese shiny yellow because it could, because it had so much of everything that aesthetics became optional. It was not poison. She looked at Tommy Bennett. He nodded just once, a small, awkward motion. His eyes were sad. Emiko knelt and picked up the tin. She pushed it toward Hana. "Tibeti," she whispered. "Eat." One by one, the women reached forward. Their movements were furtive and quick, like starving animals finally giving into the trap. They ate the bizarre American food with a mixture of desperate hunger and profound shame. They were survivors now, the most terrible, dishonorable word in their vocabulary. Sergeant Miller saw the exchange from a distance. "Well, I will be," he muttered to Ken. "See that, Yamamoto? They are just hungry. All this fuss for nothing." He started to walk back over his patience restored by this sign of what he interpreted as reason. "Now that they are fed," Miller said, his voice returning to its command gravel, "let us get this delousing done. We are burning daylight." Ken's heart sank. The fragile alien moment of connection was about to be shattered. "Sergeant, no, wait. I am not waiting, Yamamoto. Get them in the tent." As Miller barked the order, Emiko and the other women scrambled back, the terror returning instantly. The tin clattered to the ground, cheese spilling into the mud. The brief truce was over. They had been tricked, fed only to be fattened for the violation. Emiko's eyes blazed with a new cold hatred directed mostly at herself for her moment of weakness. "It was a trap," she said in Japanese. "I told you. It was bait. And I took it." Sergeant Miller, a voice cut through the chaos. It was female sharp and carried the unmistakable authority of an officer who had run out of patience for stupidity. A Navy Jeep caked in red mud had pulled up unnoticed during the confrontation. A woman in khaki fatigues, a lieutenant's bar, gleaming on her collar, was stalking toward them. She was tall, thin, and her face was a mask of pure, unfiltered exhaustion and anger. This was Lieutenant Helen Grant, a nurse from a field hospital that had been processing civilian casualties for 4 months straight. She had seen the absolute worst of the Okinawan campaign. She had held dying children. She had amputated limbs with nothing but whiskey for anesthetic. She had watched men drown in their own blood. And now she was watching American soldiers point rifles at terrified girls, and something inside her finally snapped. She jabbed a finger at Miller. "What in God's name do you think you are doing? Are you trying to start a riot?" Miller, caught off guard, stiffened to attention. "Ma'am, these are POWs. I have direct orders for delousing. Typhus protocol. And you think pointing rifles at them is the way to get it done," Grant snapped. She did not wait for an answer. She looked at the scene with the quick, assessing eye of a combat nurse. Armed, frustrated GIs, terrified, huddled women, and one translator standing between them like a human shield. "Who are you?" she barked at Ken. "Sergeant Yamamoto, MS, ma'am. Translator." "Good." She turned back to Miller. "Get your men back. 50 yards. Go sit by your Jeep. Riley, you too, all of you. Give me your interpreter and 50 yards of breathing room, or I will have you explaining to General Stilwell why you are undermining the entire civilian pacification program." Miller's face turned purple, but he was outranked and outmaneuvered. "Men," he growled through clenched teeth. "Back. Now." Tommy felt a wave of relief so profound his knees almost buckled. He and the other GIs retreated, leaving Ken alone with the nurse and the silent watching women. This was no longer his problem. Thank God it was no longer his problem. Lieutenant Grant walked slowly toward the women, stopping a good 15 feet away. She was unarmed. She unhooked her canteen from her belt and took a long drink, then held it out toward them, an offering. No one moved. She sighed, lowering the canteen. Then she looked at Ken. "Tell them who I am," she ordered, her voice softer now, but still carrying the weight of command. "Tell them I am a nurse, Kengoshi. Tell them I am here to fight sickness, not people." Ken translated, his voice low and respectful. The women watched her, their expressions unreadable. A female officer. This was not in the propaganda. The propaganda had not prepared them for the possibility of American women with authority, with power, with the ability to order men around. "Tell them," Grant continued, her eyes moving across each face, "that the lice shirami, they carry a fever. Typhus, it will kill them in 3 days. Their insides will boil. It is a miserable death. It is not an honorable death. It is just filth and pain and waste." She used the word miserable. Mijimi. Emiko flinched at the term. She had seen men die of gangrene in the caves, their bodies rotting from the inside while they still breathed. She knew exactly what a miserable death looked like. There was nothing honorable about it. No poetry, no cherry blossoms, just screaming and the smell of decay. Tell them, Grant said, looking directly at Emiko, now that in that tent there will be no soldiers. No men, just me, just medicine. She paused, then made a decision. She began to unbutton the cuffs of her own filthy fatigue shirt, rolling up the sleeves to her elbows. Her forearms were covered in red welts, lice bites scratched raw. Tell them, Grant continued, holding out her arms so they could see that we all have lice. The Americans too. The dirt does not care what army you wear. This is not about shame, this is about survival. She turned to Ken. Bring me the water and the DDT powder. Leave it on the ground, then you go too. Ken did as ordered, placing the supplies carefully on the muddy ground between Grant and the women. Ma'am, he said quietly, they are very afraid. I know, Grant said, not looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on Emiko. Go. Ken retreated, leaving the American nurse alone with the Japanese women. There was a long, tense silence. The sun continued its descent. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine coughed to life. Emiko watched Lieutenant Helen Grant. This woman was nothing like the men. She was not trying to force them. She was not offering strange yellow food as a trick. She was offering something else. Something Emiko did not have a word for. A choice. A choice between a miserable death from disease and a medical procedure administered by another woman. By someone who understood perhaps what it meant to be vulnerable. Grant pointed to the DDT powder canister, then to herself and made a dusting motion. Then she pointed to Emiko. The propaganda had prepared Emiko for a monster. Red-faced, violent, male. But how could she fight an enemy who offered her dignity, who showed her own wounds, who gave her a choice instead of an order? Emiko looked at the mud beneath her feet. She thought of the nachos, the strange yellow cheese that had tasted like abundance. She thought of the rifle barrel that had not fired. She thought of the word miserable Majime and how true it was. She thought of the imperial code that had taught her how to die with honor, but had never taught her what to live for. The American sergeant had offered force. The corporal had offered food. But the nurse, this tired woman with lice bites and sad eyes, was offering something far more dangerous. She was offering a truce, a moment of shared humanity across an unbridgeable chasm. Was this a more elaborate deception? Or was everything Emiko had been taught about the enemy a profound, unforgivable lie? Slowly, her entire body aching with more than physical pain, Emiko stood up. She did not look at her friends. She did not look at Hannah, who was trembling beside her. She looked only at Lieutenant Helen Grant. She took one step forward. Then another. Then another. The standoff was over. But for Emiko Nakamura, a new and far more terrifying battle had just begun. Not a battle against the Americans. A battle for her own soul. A battle to understand who the real enemy had been all along. The medical tent was a bubble of stark white reality in a world gone mad. It smelled of carbolic acid and lye soap, sharp and chemical. The smell of industrial cleanliness that had no place on an island still reeking of death. Lieutenant Helen Grant worked with brutal efficiency, a general commanding her own small theater of war against disease and despair. The tent flap closed behind Emiko, and the other women sealing them into a space that felt both safer and more terrifying than the open air. Inside, everything was organized with military precision. White towels folded in neat stacks, metal instruments laid out on a sterile cloth, canisters of DDT powder lined up like soldiers at attention. This was not chaos. This was American order, and it was overwhelming. Emiko stood in her undergarments provided by Grant, her arms raised as instructed. The DDT powder came next, poured from a metal canister with a sound like winter wind through dead leaves. Psh! A cloud of white chemical dust enveloped her. It settled on her scalp, her shoulders, under her arms, between her fingers. The powder was cold against her skin, invasive in its thoroughness, coating her in a fine layer of American medicine. Grant's hands moved across Emiko's scalp with practiced speed, checking for lice, using a fine-toothed metal comb that scraped against skin with a sound that made Emiko's teeth ache. There was no gentleness, but there was also no cruelty, just brisk professional detachment. The touch of a mechanic inspecting a machine, not a predator examining prey. Emiko had spent 6 days preparing for violation, for hands that would linger with hunger, for eyes that would consume her degradation. But Grant's eyes were focused only on the medical task. Her hands moved with the impersonal efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. No malice, no desire, just exhausted competence. The shame Emiko had expected, the soul-destroying humiliation her teachers had warned about, did not arrive. Instead, she felt only confusion. This was medical. This was what visiting a doctor felt like, or what she imagined it might feel like, in a world where doctors had enough supplies and time and gave a damn whether you lived or died. Why had she spent almost a week preparing to bite her own tongue and die for this? "When did you last eat real food?" Grant asked, her words translated by Ken through the tent wall. Emiko's voice was small. 6 days. In the cave. Only seaweed and rainwater. Grant paused, her hands stilling for just a moment. Then she continued her inspection. "After this, you will get a hot meal. Rice, vegetables, protein." The words hot meal struck Emiko like a physical blow. When was the last time she had eaten something hot? When had warmth become such an impossible luxury that even the promise of it could make her eyes sting with tears? The processing took 20 minutes. When it was done, each woman was handed an oversized olive drab army blanket. The fabric was coarse wool, scratchy against skin, smelling of machine oil and something indefinably American. But it was warm. It was the first genuinely warm thing Emiko had felt in weeks, and the sensation was so overwhelming, she had to sit down on the ground, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, like armor against a world that had become incomprehensible. They were led to a mess area, long folding tables set up under another canvas tarp, metal trays waiting in neat stacks, mess sergeants in stained aprons serving food with the rhythmic efficiency of factory workers. The smell hit Emiko before she could see what was being served. Salt, fat, protein. The aggressive, unapologetic smell of American abundance. Her tray was loaded with more food than she had seen in months. Scrambled eggs still steaming, cooked in real butter, their yellow gold color almost obscene in its richness. 2 slices of white bread toasted golden brown with butter melting into the porous surface. Coffee black and strong, bitter enough to strip paint, nothing like the delicate green tea of home. And then the thing that made Emiko stop walking and simply stare. 6 strips of bacon. The bacon was thick-cut American-style fried until the fat rendered translucent and the edges crisped to something approaching charcoal. The strips curled from the heat, still glistening with grease. The smell was overwhelming. Pork fat, smoked salt rendered meat. It was primal and shameless and utterly, completely excessive. Emiko sat down at a table, still clutching her blanket with one hand, staring at the tray in front of her. This was more food than she had eaten in a week, more meat than she had seen in months. In Japan, meat was a luxury, a special occasion, a small taste to flavor rice. This was protein as the main event. This was waste bordering on obscenity. 6 strips of bacon for a prisoner. Beside her, Hana whispered, her voice trembling with something between awe and horror. "Is this normal for them?" Emiko could not answer. She did not know. She looked across the mess area and saw Corporal Tommy Bennett sitting at another table with his own breakfast. The same portions. He was eating casually, reading a letter from home, a piece of toast in one hand. He did not even finish all his bacon. He left 2 strips on his plate abandoned, as if food were so plentiful that waste was acceptable. Emiko's mind struggled to process this. The soldier ate like a nobleman, but he was just a common soldier, a farm boy from Ohio. If this was how they fed prisoners and ordinary troops, how much did this nation have? How wealthy was America that they could afford to be so careless with food? She picked up a strip of bacon. The crunch, the salt exploding across her tongue, pork flavor flooding her mouth, rich and smoky and overwhelming. The fat coated everything. It was not subtle. It was aggressive, American, and impossibly shamefully delicious. Tears fell, not from sadness, not from fear, from cognitive dissonance so profound it felt like her brain was breaking. She had been taught the Americans were wasteful barbarians who valued nothing and destroyed everything. But barbarians did not feed prisoners this well. She had been taught they were cruel. But cruelty did not come with 6 strips of bacon and hot coffee and real butter. Everything she knew was wrong. Everything. Tommy Bennett looked up from his letter and saw Emiko crying into her bacon. For a moment, their eyes met across the mess tent. He looked away, first uncomfortable, returning to his letter. but the image stayed with him. A girl his sister's age weeping over breakfast. What kind of war was this? The letter in Tommy's hand was from Sarah. She wrote to him every week, filling pages with the mundane details of life in Dayton that felt like dispatches from another planet. Dear Tommy, the letter read in her careful schoolgirl script. Mom says the war might be over soon. I hope so. I miss you so much. Billy Henderson came back last week. He lost his leg at Iwo Jima, but he is alive. School starts in 3 weeks. I made the volleyball team. Coach says I am a natural setter. You always said I had good hands. Remember when we used to play catch in the back pasture? When you come home, can we do that again? Just throw the ball and talk. I have so much to tell you that I cannot fit in letters. Stay safe, big brother. Come home soon. Love, Sarah. Tommy folded the letter carefully and put it in his breast pocket. He looked at Emiko again. Sarah was 16. Emiko was maybe 19. 3 years of difference. One side of the ocean, girls played volleyball and went to school dances. The other side, they hid in caves with rocks to kill themselves. How was any of this fair? He made a decision. He walked over to where Emiko sat still crying, her bacon half-eaten. He unhooked his canteen from his belt and set it down on the table in front of her. He had practiced the phrase with Ken earlier just in case. Mitsu, he said, his pronunciation terrible. Duzo. Water. Please take it. Emiko looked up, her eyes red and swollen. The American soldier was offering her his own water. She did not understand. She did not understand anything anymore. Tommy spoke in English, knowing she would not comprehend the words, but hoping she might understand the tone. My sister is your age. If she was here, I would want someone to give her water too. He walked away before she could respond, before he could see whether she would accept or refuse. Some kindnesses were easier to give if you did not have to witness them being received. Across the compound, Sergeant Miller was approaching Ken Yamamoto with a folder under his arm and an expression that suggested the day was about to get worse. Yamamoto, Miller called out. Got a job for you. 2 prisoners just came in, Kempeitai officer and a political officer. One of them was carrying documents. Headquarters wants translation. Now. Ken followed Miller to the interrogation tent, his stomach tightening. Kempeitai, the military secret police, the ones who enforce the no-surrender code, the ones who organize the mass suicides, the ones who made lists. Inside the tent, 2 men sat bound to chairs flanked by military police. The first was Lieutenant Takeshi Sato, age 35 Kempeitai officer. His face was cold and intelligent, his military bearing intact despite the torn uniform and mud. His eyes held no fear, only contempt for his captors. The second man was older, maybe 52, wearing civilian clothes but with the bearing of authority. His name was Kenji Watanabe. He had the appearance of a school teacher, wire-rimmed glasses, and soft hands. But his eyes were the eyes of a fanatic, burning with an inner fire that made Ken deeply uneasy. Miller handed Ken an oilskin-wrapped package. Found this sewn into the civilian's jacket lining. Hidden. Must be important. Translate it. Ken unwrapped the package slowly. The oilskin outer layer was designed to keep water out to preserve whatever was inside, even through immersion. Underneath was rice paper folded multiple times. Ken unfolded it carefully. The paper was covered in precise, elegant kanji written with a brush in the formal style used for official documents. Ken's eyes began to scan. Then they widened. His hands started to shake. This was not a tactical document. This was not a map or a supply manifest or orders for troop movements. This was something far worse. The title read in formal characters, Himayuri Gakutotai Anzen Shibun Meibo. Himayuri Student Corps Safety Disposal Registry. Safety disposal, a bureaucratic euphemism for murder. It was a list. 47 names, all female. All students from the Okinawa Normal School. All members of the Himayuri Corps. Ages ranged from 16 to 22. Beside each name was additional information. Age, last known location, and a status designation, either completed or scheduled. Ken's blood turned to ice as he read. Takahashi Yuki 17, Cave 12B, completed. Yoshimura Keiko, 18 Hill 89, completed. Watanabe Hana 17, Makabe, sector scheduled. And there near the bottom of the list, a name that made Ken's breath catch in his throat. Nakamura Emiko 19, Makabe sector scheduled. Sergeant Ken said, his voice shaking so badly he could barely form words. This is a kill list. Miller looked up from his own paperwork. What the students? The Himiyori nurses. They had orders to eliminate them before American capture. This is Ken swallowed hard. This is a purge roster. Miller stared at him. Eliminate? You mean murder them? Assisted suicide? Ken said the words tasting like poison. Or outright execution if they refused. To prevent the dishonor of being captured by us. To protect imperial dignity. Jesus Christ, Miller breathed. Ken was still scanning the list, his hands trembling so hard the paper rattled. There is a girl out there right now, eating breakfast in the mess tent. Her name is on this list. Nakamura Emiko. Status scheduled. She does not even know. She has no idea that we did not just capture her from us. We captured her from them. From her own officers who had orders to kill her. Miller's face transformed from exhaustion to cold rage. And she does not even know. Ken looked at the two prisoners. Sato, the Kempeitai officer, was watching him with a slight smile. He knew what the list said. He knew what Ken had just discovered, and he was not ashamed. Ken approached the cage where Sato sat bound. He spoke in formal Japanese, his voice tight with controlled fury. This list. Why Sato's answer was matter-of-fact, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. To preserve honor. Captured women are stains on the empire. Their deaths prevent dishonor to their families and the nation. It is mercy, really. They are children, Ken said, students. They are soldiers, Sato corrected, mobilized soldiers who failed their duty to die in battle. We merely correct that failure. It is administrative, necessary. Ken's fist clenched. You were going to murder them. Sato smiled cold and thin. Murder is killing without purpose, Inu. This had purpose. Imperial dignity, national honor. You would not understand. You have betrayed your blood. You wear their uniform. You speak their language. You are not Japanese anymore. You are a ghost. The words hit Ken harder than a physical blow. He wanted to punch Sato. He wanted to smash that smug face until the smile disappeared. But he did not. He was an American soldier. He had discipline. He had rules. Sato continued, his voice conversational now, almost friendly. The Americans did not save those girls. They merely delayed the inevitable. Dishonor cannot be washed away. They will carry shame forever. Better they had died clean. Better they had jumped from the cliffs like the others. At least that would have been beautiful. Poetic. Now they are just whores who ate enemy food and wore enemy blankets. Worse than death. They are ghosts who forgot to die. Ken turned away before he did something that would cost him his rank. He walked out of the interrogation tent and stood in the Okinawan mud, breathing hard, his hands still shaking. Miller followed him out. We need to show her, show them all. They need to know what almost happened, what their own people were planning. Ken shook his head violently. Sir, with respect, no, not like this. This will destroy her. She deserves the truth, Miller insisted. The truth will kill her. Ken shot back. Not her body, her soul, everything she was raised to believe, everything her father died for. This list proves it was all lies. You cannot just drop that on someone and expect them to survive it. Tommy Bennett had approached during the argument, drawn by the raised voices. He had been listening from a distance. Maybe she needs to hear it, Tommy said quietly. My sister, if someone was planning to kill her and she did not know, I would want her to find out. Even if it hurt, especially if it hurt, because then at least she could fight back. The three men stood in a triangle of indecision. Different perspectives on mercy, different ideas about what truth owed to the traumatized. Finally, Miller made the decision. We tell her, but carefully. Yamamoto, you translate, and we get Lieutenant Grant there too. She has a better touch with them than any of us. Ken nodded, resigned. He went to find Grant. Lieutenant Helen Grant was checking on the other Hemiyori women in the medical recovery area when Ken found her. Ma'am, he said quietly, we need your help. There is something Emiko needs to see, something bad. We need you there when we tell her. Grant looked up, her eyes tired. How bad? Bad enough that she might try to kill herself when she finds out, Ken said. Bad enough that everything she believes about honor and duty and her own country is about to be destroyed. Grant stood up, wiping her hands on a towel. Show me. They brought Emiko to a small tent, private and quiet. Present were Ken, Grant, and Tommy standing guard outside. Miller had decided his presence would make things worse. He was probably right. Ken placed the unfolded list on a small folding table. Emiko-san, he said in Japanese, his voice as gentle as he could make it. We found this document on a Kempeitai officer. I need to show you. I am sorry. Emiko looked at the paper. She recognized the format immediately. Official document, formal kanji. Her eyes began to scan. Then her face went white, all blood draining, as if someone had opened a valve. She read the names. Girls she had known. Girls she had studied beside. Girls she had laughed with and worked beside in the caves. Takahashi Yuki, Yoshimura Keiko. Beside many names, the word completed. A bureaucratic stamp on young lives extinguished. Then she saw other names, still living, still scheduled. Watanabe Hana, her friend, 17 years old, scheduled for safety disposal. And then near the bottom, her own name, Nakamura Emiko 19. Makabe sector scheduled. The silence in the tent was absolute. 15 seconds passed. Emiko did not move, did not breathe, just stared at her own name on a death list written by her own officers. Finally, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke. Nani-kor, what is this? Ken explained each word careful. A purge list. Officers were ordered to eliminate female students before American capture. To prevent dishonor. Your teacher Yoshida Sensei, her name is here too. Completed status. 3 days ago, Emiko's hand began to tremble. They killed Sensei. She was 52 years old. She taught us calligraphy. Her voice broke. She taught me how to write my name in beautiful characters. She said I had talent. She looked back at the list with dawning, horrified comprehension. Hana's name. They were going to kill Hana. She is 17. She still believed in the emperor. She still thought dying for Japan was glorious. And they were going to murder her for surviving. Emiko's breath came faster, hyperventilating. Her hands clutched at the table edge. Grant moved closer but did not touch, giving her space to break. We were going to die anyway, Emiko said. All of us. Not from battle. From them. From our own side. Yes, Ken said simply. Emiko's keening started low and built. It was not crying, it was the sound of a soul tearing in half. She fell to her knees, arms wrapped around herself, rocking back and forth. Everything was a lie. Father died for a lie. Mother believed a lie. I almost died for a lie. Ken said nothing. There was nothing to say. Sometimes truth was simply a weight that had to be borne. Bring him, Emiko said suddenly. Her voice had changed. Colder now, harder. Bring the officer who wrote this. I want to see his face. Ken looked at Miller, who had been standing just outside the tent. The sergeant nodded grimly. Bring Sato here. She needs to hear it from him. 2 military police officers dragged Lieutenant Takeshi Sato into the small tent, his hands bound behind his back. He entered with his head-high military bearing intact despite the circumstances. When he saw Emiko kneeling on the ground, tears streaming down her face, his expression did not soften. Instead, his lip curled with something close to disgust. Weak, he said in Japanese. This is exactly why the order was necessary. Emiko looked up. For a moment, she did not recognize him. Then memory surfaced like something drowning. She had seen this man before. A week ago, maybe longer, time had lost meaning in the caves. She had been passing by the command room in the headquarters cave at Mabuni. She had seen him talking with Yoshida Sensei. She had overheard fragments. The girls cannot be allowed to shame us. Better clean deaths now than dishonor later. She had not understood then. She understood now. You, Emiko, said, her voice shaking. You killed Sensei. Sato looked at her as if she were an insect. I killed no one. I gave them the honor of choosing their own end. Seppuku. Ritual suicide. Clean. Beautiful. Those who refused, yes, I helped them fulfill their duty. It was mercy. Mercy. Emiko's voice rose to a shout. Mercy, you are a stain now, Sato said calmly. Captured. Dishonored. You ate their food. You wear their blankets. You have become their whore without even being touched. Death would have been merciful. Now you carry shame forever. You will never be Japanese again. You are a ghost, worse than dead. Ken started to step between them, but Grant held up a hand. Let her face him. She needs this. Emiko stood slowly. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them steady. She walked toward Sato until she was close enough to see the pores on his face, the gray in his hair, the absolute absence of doubt in his eyes. You are wrong, she said quietly. Sato laughed. You dare to tell me I am wrong. You who surrendered, you who failed your emperor. Emiko's voice grew stronger. You are wrong. You are the shame. Not me, not Hannah. Not the girls whose names you wrote on your death list. You. The ones who sent us to die and called it honor. The ones who murdered children and called it duty. She knelt down, scooped up a handful of mud from the tent floor, where rain had leaked through, and stood again. This uniform, she said, looking at the insignia on Sato's torn tunic. It meant my father. It meant duty. It meant Japan. Now it only means lies. She threw the mud, not at his face, but at his chest, at the military insignia. The wet earth splattered across the symbols of rank and authority, obscuring them. You lied to us, Emiko continued, her voice rising with each word. You sent us into caves to die. You told us the Americans were demons. You said they would torture us, rape us, eat our children. And when we survived, when we discovered you were the liars, you decided to kill us to hide your shame. Not our shame, yours. Her hands were clenched into fists. You wrote our death sentences because we were inconvenient, because living girls tell the truth, because truth destroys empires built on lies. You were not protecting our honor. You were protecting your lie. Sato's face had gone cold and hard. You will regret this apostasy. When Japan rises again, when the emperor's divine will is restored, you will be remembered as a traitor. Your name will be dirt. Emiko stepped closer, her face now inches from his. Japan will rise again, but not your Japan. Not the Japan that murders its own daughters. That Japan is dead. You killed it, not the Americans. You. She turned to Ken. This man, the other one. What will happen to them, prisoner of war trials, Ken said. War crimes tribunal, probably. They will be held accountable, good, Emiko said. Let them live. Let them live a long time in cages. Let them see Japan rebuild without them. Let them watch their empire turn to sand and blow away. That is better punishment than death. Death is what they wanted. Give them life instead. Give them time to understand how wrong they were. Sato spat on the ground near her feet. You are already dead, girl. You just do not know it yet. The MPs dragged him out. His voice echoed back as he was pulled away. Ghosts, all of you. Ghosts who forgot how to die. When he was gone, the tent fell silent, except for Emiko's ragged breathing. She stood frozen, staring at the mud on her hands, at the list still lying on the table, with her name written in elegant brushstrokes beside the word scheduled. Lieutenant Grant moved closer and knelt beside her. Through Ken's translation, she spoke quietly. I need to tell you something, Emiko. Emiko did not respond, but she was listening. I had a brother, Grant said. David. He was 19. Your age. He was a Marine. A Japanese soldier killed him. Guadalcanal, 1942. Gut shot. He took 4 hours to die, calling for our mother, screaming for morphine they did not have. Emiko stiffened, waiting for the accusation, the anger, the hatred. I hated you, Grant continued. All of you. Every Japanese person on earth. That is why I came to Okinawa. I wanted to be where you were. I wanted to watch you suffer. I wanted you to feel what David felt when he died. Emiko closed her eyes. But then I got here, Grant said. And a week ago, an 8-year-old Okinawan girl died in my arms. Shrapnel in her gut. She kept calling for Oka-san. Mother, and I realized you did not kill David. This war killed David. The same war that killed that little girl. The same war that tried to kill you. We are both victims of men who make lists and give orders and never have to watch the faces of the people they destroy. Emiko opened her eyes, the tears falling freely now. Your brother. I am sorry. Grant's own eyes were wet, and I am sorry about your teacher, about your classmates, about the father you lost and the life you should have had. I am sorry that we live in a world where monsters wear uniforms and call murder duty. She reached up and unclasped her dog tags from around her neck. She held them out to Emiko. These have my name, Helen Catherine Grant. After the war, when this is over, if you ever need help, you find the American Red Cross. You say my name. Someone will help you. I give you my word. Why, Emiko whispered. Why would you help me? Because David would have wanted me to, Grant said simply. Because he was good. Better than me. Better than this war. And because someone needs to survive and tell the truth about what happened here. About the lists and the lies and the girls who were caught between empires. Emiko took the dog tags with trembling hands. The metal was still warm from Grant's skin. She clutched them like a lifeline. Outside the tent, Tommy Bennett stood guard, listening to the muffled voices. Ken emerged first, his face drawn and exhausted. Tommy looked at him. Is she going to be okay? Ken lit a cigarette with shaking hands. I do not know what okay means anymore, Riley. She just found out her own country wanted her dead, that her teacher was murdered by her own officers, that everything she was raised to believe was a lie. How do you come back from that? Tommy thought of Sarah back home safe in Dayton, worrying about volleyball tryouts and school dances. The distance between that world and this one felt infinite. What happens to her now? To all of them, Ken exhaled smoke. Tomorrow they move to Ishikawa camp. Bigger facility, better food. They will be there until the war ends. After that, he shrugged. Repatriation, probably. Back to Okinawa. Back to nothing. 3 weeks later, Emiko sat on a cot in the Ishikawa civilian internment camp watching the late July sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The camp was clean, organized, run with military efficiency. There were regular meals, rice, vegetables, protein. Sometimes spam, that strange canned meat that tasted like salt, and preservation in American industry. Sometimes eggs. Once memorably ice cream, which Emiko had never tasted before, and which made Hana laugh for the first time since the caves. Emiko had gained 8 pounds. Her hair was growing back dark and thick where it had been shorn for lice. She attended English lessons taught by bored GIs who were waiting for orders to ship home or invade Japan proper. She could now say basic phrases. Hello, thank you, I am Emiko. Where's the bathroom? My name means blessed child, but I do not feel blessed. She still wore Grant's dog tags under her shirt, the metal warm against her skin. She had not taken them off since receiving them. They were proof that something real had happened, that the strange mercy she had been shown was not a fever dream. But the internal struggle continued. Every bite of American food felt like betrayal. Every English word learned felt like abandoning her father's ghost. Every morning she woke alive felt like failure to complete the duty she had been raised to fulfill. Survivor's guilt was a weight that no amount of bacon could lift. Hana sat beside her on the cot, younger and somehow more resilient. Do you think about going back to Okinawa every day? Emiko said. And every day I realize there is nothing to go back to. My family is dead. My school is destroyed. If I return, I am Okubyu, a coward who surrendered. I will be shunned, shamed. Better to have died. That is what Sato said, Hana pointed out quietly. That we are better off dead. Are you going to prove him right? Emiko had no answer. On August 15, 1945, the camp speakers crackled to life with an announcement in Japanese. Every prisoner stopped what they were doing and listened. The voice that emerged was tinny, distant, nearly incomprehensible through the static and the unfamiliar formal court Japanese. But the message was clear enough. It was Emperor Hirohito himself, the jewel voice broadcast. The first time most Japanese citizens had ever heard their God Emperor's voice. He spoke of bearing the unbearable, enduring the unendurable. He spoke of the war situation developing not necessarily to Japan's advantage. He never used the word surrender, but everyone understood. The war was over. Japan had lost. In the camp, reactions were mixed. Some women wept. Some sat in stunned silence. Some unexpectedly looked relieved. The pressure of fighting a losing war, of maintaining the fiction of inevitable victory, had been exhausting. At least now it was done. Emiko felt numbness first, then an unexpected wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy. Father died for nothing, she thought. Sensei died for nothing. The chrysanthemum fell and it was not beautiful. It was just waste. But then another thought. The war is over, which means no more girls will get death lists. No more mothers will jump from cliffs. No more children will die calling for parents who are already dead. It is over. Finally over. 3 days later, an American officer, Captain Morrison, addressed the camp through a translator. Japan has surrendered. American occupation of the home islands will begin shortly. Civilian repatriation to Okinawa will proceed in phases. First phase, families with children. Second phase, elderly and infirm. Third phase, all others. Emiko calculated quickly. Third phase. That meant months of waiting. Months in this camp, eating American food, learning American words, becoming less Japanese with every passing day. Captain Morrison continued. However, any individual wishing to emigrate to the United States may submit an application. Slots are limited. Priority will be given to those who aided American forces or who have American sponsors. Whispers rippled through the assembled prisoners. America leave Japan forever. That night, Emiko lay awake on her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling of the barracks. The choice before her felt impossible. Return to Okinawa meant returning to ash and ghosts and a lifetime of shame. But going to America meant abandoning everything she had ever known, every language except the few English phrases she had learned, every custom and tradition that made her Japanese. She pulled out Grant's dog tags and held them in the darkness. Metal warmed from her body heat. Helen Catherine Grant, Lieutenant, United States Navy. The name of a woman who had lost her brother and chosen mercy anyway. The name of someone who had seen Emiko at her lowest and offered dignity instead of degradation. She thought of Ken Yamamoto caught between two worlds wearing an American uniform while his parents sat in an American prison camp. She thought of Tommy Bennett who had given her nachos when she was ready to die. She thought of the breakfast that had broken her certainty. 6 strips of bacon. Abundance so excessive it was obscene. Kindness so unexpected it was devastating. She made a decision. The next morning she asked for paper and a pencil. Her English was broken, her grammar terrible, but she wrote carefully, forming each letter with the same precision Yoshida-sensei had taught her to use with kanji. Dear Yamamoto family, she wrote, my name Nakamura Emiko. Sergeant Ken help me. I am student nurse. War over now. I have no family, no home. Ken say you help if I need. I want come America. Learn. Maybe teach someday, like before war. Can you help? I have nothing, give you. Only promise I tell truth about war. About what happened. Please answer. I wait. Emiko. She folded the letter and gave it to the camp postal clerk. The clerk, a bored private from Tennessee, took it without comment and tossed it in the outgoing mailbag. Emiko watched it disappear among dozens of other letters, all going to America, all carrying hopes and fears and futures. That letter would take 6 weeks to reach Salinas, California. Emiko did not know if it would arrive, did not know if Ken's parents would help an enemy girl, a Japanese face, asking for American mercy. Did not know anything except that staying in Japan meant living as a ghost among ghosts, and she had already died enough times. Hana made her own choice. She would return to Okinawa, try to rebuild, find surviving family, if any existed. The two friends promised to write. They never did. Some friendships were forged in hell and could not survive the peace that followed. 20 years later, in 1965, Emiko Nakamura stood in front of a classroom at San Francisco City College. She was 39 years old now, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the weight of memory. She wore a simple dress, American style, and sensible shoes. She had been teaching Japanese language and culture for 10 years. Her students were mostly young Americans, children of the generation that had fought the war trying to understand the enemy their fathers had faced. A student raised his hand. Professor Nakamura, were you there during the Battle of Okinawa? Emiko paused, chalk hovering over the blackboard. Yes. What was it like? She set down the chalk and turned to face the class. It was the day I learned that the world is not divided into good people and bad people, or even good countries and bad countries. It is divided into people who believe lies and people who survive long enough to learn the truth. The class was silent, sensing this was not a rehearsed answer. The bell rang. Students gathered their books and filed out. Emiko stood alone in the empty classroom. On her desk, carefully folded, was an olive drab army blanket. She had kept it for 20 years, through immigration and naturalization, and night school and her teaching degree. It was threadbare now, the wool thin from washing and time. But she could not let it go. It was the first thing she had ever owned that was not given to her by the Empire. It was proof she had chosen to survive. A knock on the door made her look up. A man stood in the doorway, older now, gray at the temples, wearing an army dress uniform with colonel's insignia. It took her a moment to recognize him. Then her breath caught. Bennett Santami smiled the same awkward farm boy smile, just aged. "Took me a while to find you. Ken told me you were teaching in San Francisco before he—" His smile faltered before he passed. Emiko felt her heart break. "Ken died last year," Tommy said quietly. "Heart attack, 47 years old. Worked himself to death, helping Japanese Americans resettle after the camps closed. His parents, too. They spent 30 years helping refugees. Because of you, actually. Me, your letter, 1945. Ken's mother said it was the first time she really understood that the camps were wrong. Because if an enemy girl could ask them for help and they could not give it because they were imprisoned by their own country, then what was the difference between America and Japan?" Emiko sat down heavily in her desk chair. "They got me to America, sponsored my immigration, enrolled me in school, helped me become a teacher. I owe them everything." "No," Tommy said, stepping into the classroom. "They owed you. We all did. You were proof that what we did on Okinawa, feeding you, protecting you from your own officers, treating you like a human being instead of an enemy, that it mattered, that it meant something." He looked at the blanket on her desk. "You kept it." 20 years, Emiko said, touching the worn fabric. "I cannot let it go. It is all I have from that time. Proof it was real. Proof I was shown mercy when I deserved none." "You deserved it," Tommy said firmly. "You were 19. You were a kid. You deserved to live." They stood in silence for a moment, two people separated by language and culture, and war connected by 6 strips of bacon, and a moment of choice in the Okinawan mud. "I came to ask you something," Tommy said. "There is a memorial being built, Himayuri Peace Museum, in Okinawa, for the students who died in the battle. 240 names. They want testimonies from survivors. Will you go back?" Emiko felt ice in her stomach. "I swore I would never return." "I know," Tommy said. "But Emiko, they want the truth about the death lists, about the Kempeitai, about what your own officers tried to do. The girls who are teenagers now in Japan, they are being taught the same lies. Different words, same lies. Honor means dying. Shame means surviving. Someone needs to tell them that is wrong." Emiko looked at the blanket, at Grant's dog tags she still kept in her desk drawer, at the photograph on her wall showing her first class of American students. "I cannot go alone." "You will not be alone," Tommy said. "I will come with you. Helen will come. She is retired now, living in Boston, but she said she would go if you went. We will all go together." "Why?" Emiko asked. "Why do you care about a memorial for Japanese girls?" Tommy pulled out a photograph from his wallet. A woman in her 30s, surrounded by children in a classroom. "My sister Sarah, she is a teacher now too, in Ohio. She named her daughter Emiko, after you. Last year, that little Emiko asked her what her uncle did in the war, and Sarah told her he fed a Japanese girl nachos when she was ready to die. And that girl became a professor who teaches truth to Americans. Sarah said that is the war story she is proud of, not the killing, the nachos." Emiko laughed, a sound halfway between joy and sorrow. "The nachos. That absurd yellow cheese. Changed your life," Tommy said. "Changed everything." Emiko agreed. In June 1970, Emiko Nakamura stood before a stone memorial in Okinawa. The Himayuri Peace Museum had been built on the site of one of the cave hospitals where so many students had died. The memorial wall was engraved with 240 names, girls aged 14 to 22. Dead in the final months of the war. Emiko's name was not on the wall because she had survived, because a farm boy from Ohio had given her cheese, because a nurse who had lost her brother had chosen mercy, because a translator caught between two worlds had chosen truth. Standing beside her were Colonel Thomas Bennett in dress uniform, Helen Grant, now retired and gray-haired, and Ken Yamamoto's elderly parents representing their son, who had worked himself to death trying to build bridges across the chasm of war. Hundreds of people had gathered for the dedication. Okinawan civilians, Japanese officials, American military brass, survivors and children of the dead, and people who simply wanted to remember. Emiko stepped to the podium. She spoke in Japanese, her words translated for the American delegation. Her voice was steady, strengthened by 20 years of teaching 20 years of telling truth to young people who had not lived through the lie. "I stand before you as a coward," she began. "I survived when I was taught to die. I ate enemy food when I was taught to starve. I accepted enemy mercy when I was taught they had none." She paused, looking at the names on the wall. "I stand here because of a list, a death list, written by my own officers, men who wore the same uniform as my father. They decided my life was worth less than their idea of honor. But I was saved, not by Japanese generals, by American soldiers. A farm boy from Ohio who gave me melted cheese. A nurse who had every reason to hate me but chose mercy instead. A translator caught between two worlds who chose truth over loyalty." Her voice grew stronger. "I learned that the war was not between good and evil. It was between people who believed lies and people who survived long enough to question them. To the girls listening today, do not let anyone write your name on a list and call it duty. Do not let anyone tell you that your life is worth less than their pride. Do not let anyone convince you that dying for a lie is more honorable than living for the truth. The emperor told us to bear the unbearable. I did, but not the way he meant. I bore the unbearable truth that my enemies were human, that my protectors were murderers, that surviving was not weakness. It was the greatest act of defiance." She looked directly at the young girls in the audience, teenagers in school uniforms not unlike the ones she had worn. "I survived, and I chose to remember, not to hate, but to witness, so that no girl, Japanese or American, ever has to choose between honor and her life again." When she finished, there was silence, then applause, then weeping. Emiko stepped down from the podium and walked to the memorial wall. She placed her hand on the stone where her teacher's name was carved. Yoshida Michiko, age 52, died June 19, 1945, completed. Tommy Bennett placed his hand over hers. Then Helen Grant placed her hand over his. Then Ken's mother, tears streaming down her weathered face, placed her hand on top. 4 hands on cold stone. Former enemies, now something deeper than friends. Witnesses, survivors, truth-tellers. The photographer captured the moment, 4 people of different nations and different losses connected by a single truth. That mercy is stronger than hate. That survival is braver than death. That an olive blanket and 6 strips of bacon can save a life just as surely as a bullet can end one. Emiko looked up at the Okinawan sky, blue and peaceful, now empty of planes and shells and the smoke of empire. She thought of the girl she had been kneeling in the mud, ready to die. She thought of the list with her name marked for disposal. She thought of the moment she had chosen to eat that first chip of nachos, the moment she had chosen survival over honor. "The list said I was supposed to die," Emiko said quietly, speaking to no one and everyone. "The blanket said I was allowed to live. It took me 20 years to understand the difference. Honor is not dying when someone orders you to. Honor is living when someone forbids you to. The war taught me to hate. Peace taught me to question. And survival taught me this: the truth is worth more than any empire. And bacon, absurd, excessive American bacon, sometimes saves more lives than bullets ever could." The sun set over Okinawa, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The memorial service ended. People dispersed to homes and hotels, and lives that continued because the war had finally truly ended. But the 4 of them remained, hands still touching, stone bearing witness to the 240 names and the incalculable weight of the ones who had survived to tell their stories. That night, Emiko stood at her hotel window, looking out at the rebuilt Okinawa. The lights of homes where families slept in peace. The ocean that separated nations but could not separate the truth. She whispered a prayer in Japanese to the girls on the wall. "You did not die in vain. I witness. Your names are not forgotten." Then in English to the living who had saved her. "Thank you for seeing me when you were taught to see a monster, for choosing mercy when hate was easier." The island was quiet. The war was over. But the work of witnessing would never be finished. The list had said she was scheduled for disposal. The blanket had said she was worthy of warmth. She had chosen the blanket. And in choosing it, she had become something her teachers never prepared her for. Not a hero, not a victim, but a witness to the moment when the survival became the most rebellious act of all.